Hello, good day and welcome to this session on responsibilities of the contract manager. By the end of this session, you should be able to understand who a contract manager is, appreciate the roles of a contract manager in contracting, as well as identify the roles of the procurement function in contract management. So basically, a contract manager is someone who is appointed to direct and oversee the contract throughout its life cycle. The contract manager serves as the liaison between companies, employees, customers, vendors, and the independent contractors. They facilitate negotiations, recommendations, record keeping, monitoring, change management, among others. So basically, a contract manager is usually appointed to oversee the contract execution or the contract management process from the beginning to the end, and they have certain functions that they play in managing supplier side and buyer side activities in terms of the contract management process. So we have certain operational responsibilities of a contract manager, and looking at the buyer side, the contract manager acts as a single point of contact for all commercial and legal correspondence related to the contract. So the contract manager, if they are appointed, a single contract manager is appointed, they serve as the point of contact in terms of the buyer. If the buyer appoints a single contract manager, that person is going to be the point of contact for all commercial and legal correspondence. So they are expected to have some of these backgrounds so as to facilitate their ability to execute this operational responsibility. Then secondly, they monitor contract performance and report on overall service levels. So because they are appointed to ensure successful execution of the contract from beginning to the end, they have to monitor and control the contract management process by identifying the appropriate and accepted service level and then reporting on whether it has been successfully achieved or not. So if a buyer appoints a contract manager, they represent the interests of the buyer to the supplier. So they have to communicate what the buyer wants to the supplier so that the supplier can execute it accordingly. And then they oversee operation and administration of the contract. So they perform administrative roles such as overseeing the day-to-day execution and management of the contract from beginning to close out. Then they negotiate remedies with suppliers in terms of breach of terms. So because the agreement between the buyer and the supplier is legally binding, in case one person breaches the contract, it's the contract manager who ensures that remedies are awarded accordingly and the parties perform their part of the contract accordingly. They maintain revised and updated contract terms. So because of the essence of change management and variation control, the contract manager is supposed to keep record of initial agreed contract terms as well as revised and updated contract terms as and when a change arises. Then finally, they determine and take remedial actions in agreement with supplier on any problems that arise in delivering the contract. Then on the supplier side too, their contract manager is responsible for monitoring contract performance. So they monitor whether the supplier is actually executing or performing the contracts in tandem with the agreed terms. They also identify and manage exceptions or variations that arise in terms of what the buyer wants. Then they represent the supplier's interest to the buyer and respond to changing customer needs, such as they manage variations or manage changes that arises in the contract. Then they negotiate remedies with the buyer in the event of a breach of contract terms by the buyer. or by any of the parties. Then they determine and take remedial actions in agreement with the buyer on any problems that arise. So we move on to some specific responsibilities of a contract manager at the various stages of the contract management process. So during contract development, contract managers are responsible for defining service levels, specifying documentation requirements, and contract performance indicators, among others, which would establish the contract prior to its execution. And then you move on to contract administration or execution, where the day-to-day activities that are required in implementing or executing the contract. So the contract manager is responsible for implementing procedures which define working methods and practices between parties. They operate routine administrative and clerical functions which support contract performance. Then the contract manager is responsible for conducting risk assessment and management, because the contracts will be executed in an environment with uncertainty. So they have to ensure proactive risk identification and management techniques are put in place to manage the risks as and when they arise. Then during performance management, contract managers are also required to monitor and review outputs to determine if they are meeting performance indicators. They are also required to evaluate supplier performance and provide feedback on the state of activities. And then finally, relationship management. Because it is two parties who may or may not be related in terms of industry, in terms of personnel, they have to ensure that there is minimum conflict. And in order to achieve so, we have to constructively manage the relationship that is existing between the two sides. So this session has explained who a contract manager is, the roles of a contract manager in contracting, as well as the roles of the procurement function in contract management.